For centuries, kings fought wars over gold. Empires crossed oceans in search of silver. Explorers risked their lives chasing spices. But one of the most powerful objects in human history wasn't precious, beautiful, or rare. It was buried in dirt, misshapen, covered in mud, often ignored. Yet this humble vegetable has fed billions of people, built empires, prevented famine, caused one of history's greatest humanitarian disasters, and permanently reshaped the population of entire continents. Without it, the modern world would look very different. This is the remarkable story of the potato, the crop that changed the world. Long before anyone called it a potato, before Europe, before written history, there were the Andes, stretching thousands of kilometers along the western edge of South America. The Andes are among the highest mountain ranges on Earth. Their peaks rise into thin air where temperatures swing from warm sunshine during the day to freezing cold at night. At first glance, it doesn't seem like the ideal place to grow food. The rocky slopes are steep, the soil is unforgiving, the weather is unpredictable, yet this harsh landscape became the birthplace of one of humanity's greatest agricultural achievements. Nearly 8,000 years ago, small groups of indigenous people wandered these mountains searching for edible plants. Among the grasses and shrubs grew tiny underground tubers. They were nothing like the potatoes we know today. Some were no larger than walnuts. Many were twisted into strange shapes. Most tasted unbearably bitter, and many were poisonous. Wild potatoes naturally contain chemical compounds called glycoalkaloids. These chemicals protect the plant from insects and animals, but they can also make humans violently ill. Eat enough of them, and the consequences can be deadly. At first, these tubers must have seemed almost useless. A food that could poison you was hardly food at all. But instead of abandoning the plant, the people of the Andes became determined to understand it. That decision would quietly change human history. Imagine trying to solve a deadly puzzle without books, without laboratories, without microscopes, without even knowing what chemistry was. Generation after generation, Andean communities experimented. Some potatoes were soaked in icy mountain streams. Others were left outside during freezing nights before warming again beneath the intense mountain sun. Slowly, through observation rather than theory, they discovered something remarkable. Running water reduced bitterness. Repeated freezing and thawing broke down harmful compounds. What had once been poisonous became edible. The process took days, sometimes longer. It demanded patience, experience, and an intimate understanding of the natural world. These ancient farmers would never have described their work as science, yet that's exactly what it was. Every successful harvest became another experiment. Every season produced new knowledge. Over hundreds of generations, they also began selecting the least bitter plants for replanting. Without realizing it, they were practicing selective breeding thousands of years before genetics was ever understood. Each harvest became slightly safer, slightly larger, slightly more nutritious. Year after year, century after century, until the poisonous wild plant had slowly transformed into something entirely new. Humanity had not simply discovered the potato, it had created it. As centuries passed, the potato became more than food. It became the foundation of civilization. Around the 15th century, the Inca Empire stretched across much of western South America, making it one of the largest empires ever built in the Americas. Its success depended on something most people rarely think about: agriculture. Growing food high in the Andes was extraordinarily difficult. Different elevations created different climates only a few kilometers apart. One hillside could be warm enough for maize. The next might freeze overnight. Rather than fighting nature, Inca farmers learned to work with it. They carved enormous agricultural terraces into mountainsides, creating level fields that reduced erosion and captured precious water. Each elevation became a carefully managed growing zone. And at the center of this sophisticated system stood the potato. The Inca cultivated thousands of different varieties. Some were yellow, others purple, red, blue, even nearly black. Each variety had been adapted to a specific altitude, a specific soil, a specific climate. This wasn't random farming, it was agricultural engineering. Long before modern plant science, the Inca understood that diversity meant resilience. If one variety failed, another survived. Their fields became living libraries of genetic knowledge. Knowledge accumulated patiently over thousands of years. But growing food is only half the battle. Keeping it alive after harvest is another challenge entirely. Fresh potatoes spoil, especially without refrigeration. For ancient civilizations, food storage often determined whether people survived winter or starved before spring. The Inca solved this problem with breathtaking ingenuity. High in the mountains, nighttime temperatures regularly dropped below freezing. Farmers spread freshly harvested potatoes across open ground. During the night, the tubers froze solid. When the morning sun rose, families walked barefoot across them, gently squeezing out moisture. Then the potatoes froze again the following night, and again, and again. After several cycles, what remained was a dry, lightweight product called chuño. Most of its moisture had disappeared. So had the bacteria that caused spoilage. The result was extraordinary. Chuño could remain edible for years, not weeks, not months, years. Some stores lasted a decade. That single innovation transformed the Inca economy. Food could now be stockpiled against drought. Armies could travel vast distances carrying lightweight rations. Remote mountain communities could survive failed harvests. The empire suddenly possessed something every great civilization needs: food security. In many ways, chuño became one of the earliest examples of large-scale food preservation in human history. It allowed an empire surrounded by mountains to feed hundreds of thousands of people with remarkable efficiency. The potato had become far more than a crop. It had become infrastructure. The invisible engine powering one of history's greatest civilizations. And yet, the people who would soon carry this extraordinary plant across the Atlantic had almost no idea what they had found. They came looking for something else entirely: gold, silver, riches beyond imagination. Instead, they unknowingly stumbled upon something even more valuable. When Spanish conquistadors arrived in South America during the 16th century, they were obsessed with one thing: treasure. Every expedition promised unimaginable wealth, cities of gold, mountains of silver. The Spanish eventually found both. They stripped the Inca Empire of enormous riches, shipping shiploads of precious metals back across the Atlantic. But amid all that glittering wealth, they overlooked something that would prove even more valuable: the potato. To the Spanish, it was simply the ordinary food of conquered people. It didn't sparkle. It couldn't be minted into coins. It couldn't decorate a cathedral or finance a war. So, sometime around the 1570s, a few potatoes made the journey to Europe almost as an afterthought. No royal ceremony welcomed them. No merchants competed to buy them. No one imagined they were carrying one of history's greatest agricultural revolutions. Instead, potatoes were fed to sailors on long voyages, where they helped prevent scurvy thanks to their high vitamin C content. Hospitals served them to the poor. Monasteries grew them in quiet gardens. For decades, the potato remained little more than an obscure curiosity from a distant continent. Europe had discovered a miracle and barely noticed. Part of the problem was appearance. Europeans judged food with their eyes long before they judged it with science. Grains like wheat and barley rose proudly toward the sky. Bread symbolized civilization itself. Entire kingdoms depended on it. Religious ceremonies honored it. To many people, grain represented God's blessing. The potato seemed to represent the opposite. It grew hidden beneath the earth. Its rough skin was scarred with strange little eyes. It emerged from mud instead of sunlight, and perhaps most alarming of all, it belonged to the same botanical family as deadly nightshade. Today we know that botanical relatives are not necessarily equally dangerous. But people living 400 years ago had no such understanding. If one member of the family was poisonous, why wouldn't the others be? Rumors spread faster than facts ever could. Some claimed potatoes caused leprosy. Others insisted they spread tuberculosis. In parts of Europe, they were blamed for laziness, immorality, even uncontrolled desire. In Russia, some religious leaders called them the devil's apple. In Scotland, certain ministers argued that because potatoes were never mentioned in the Bible, they could not possibly be intended for human consumption. As strange as these beliefs sound today, they shape the decisions of millions. Fear can be remarkably persuasive, especially when knowledge is scarce. For nearly 2 centuries, Europe rejected one of the world's most productive food crops. The irony was almost unbelievable. While harvests frequently failed, while famine returned again and again, while poor families struggled to survive, an extraordinary solution sat quietly in botanical gardens. Many wealthy households preferred growing potato plants for their flowers rather than eating their roots. The blossoms were delicate, elegant, almost exotic. Some aristocrats even wore them as fashionable decorations. Imagine that for a moment. A plant capable of feeding entire nations, reduced to a garden ornament. History often changes because people fail to recognize what is right in front of them. Fortunately, not everyone shared those prejudices. In the Kingdom of Prussia, one ruler viewed the potato very differently. Frederick II, better known as Frederick the Great, he wasn't interested in fashion. He was interested in survival. Throughout the 18th century, Prussia was repeatedly dragged into brutal European wars. Enemy armies followed a familiar strategy: destroy the grain fields, burn the harvest, starve the population. It was devastatingly effective, until Frederick realized something. You can't easily burn food that's hidden underground. A marching army might destroy wheat without effort. But potatoes remained safely buried beneath the soil. An invading force could walk directly across a potato field, completely unaware that thousands of meals lay beneath their feet. The king immediately recognized its military value. A nation that could keep feeding itself could keep fighting. Food was no longer merely agriculture. It had become a strategy. Frederick ordered his people to grow potatoes. The response was less than enthusiastic. Many peasants still believed the crop was fit only for livestock. Some openly mocked the king's order. Others simply ignored it. Threats achieved little. So Frederick tried something altogether different. According to one famous story, he planted a royal potato garden near Berlin. Then he surrounded it with armed guards. The message was obvious. Anything protected so carefully by the king himself must be incredibly valuable. Curiosity did the rest. Before long, villagers began sneaking into the royal fields at night to steal potatoes for themselves. Whether every detail of the story is historically accurate remains uncertain. But its lesson is timeless. People often desire what appears exclusive. Within a generation, potatoes had spread across Prussia. What fear could not accomplish, curiosity did. Around the same time, another remarkable advocate emerged across the border in France. His name was Antoine-Augustin Parmentier. Ironically, he owed his conversion to the potato to war. Captured during the 7 Years' War, Parmenter spent years as a prisoner in Prussia. There, potatoes formed a large part of his daily diet. He expected sickness. Instead, he remained healthy. The experience shattered everything France believed about the crop. Returning home, Parmenter dedicated his life to changing public opinion, not through force, but through persuasion. He organized lavish dinner parties where every course featured potatoes, soups, bread, pies, even desserts. The guests included scientists, politicians, members of the royal court. Each meal quietly challenged centuries of prejudice. If distinguished nobles enjoyed potatoes, perhaps ordinary people could too. Parmenter also understood something that modern marketers know very well. People don't just buy products, they buy stories. He persuaded King Louis XVI to wear potato blossoms in his buttonhole. Queen Marie Antoinette wore the flowers in her hair. Suddenly, the same plant once considered unfit for humans became fashionable among Europe's elite. Its reputation began to change. Not because the potato itself had changed, but because people's perceptions had. Then Parmenter borrowed a brilliant idea. Outside Paris, he planted large potato fields. He hired guards to watch them during the day. At night, the guards conveniently disappeared. The fields became irresistible. Curious villagers slipped inside and stole potatoes to plant themselves. Exactly as Parmenter had hoped, it was one of history's earliest public relations campaigns. Instead of forcing people to accept something unfamiliar, he made them believe they had discovered it on their own. Sometimes changing history requires less argument and more psychology. Slowly, almost invisibly, the potato conquered Europe. Not through battle, but through hunger, necessity, and clever persuasion. By the end of the 18th century, more and more families depended on it. Harvest after harvest, populations grew. Children who might once have died in famine survived. Villages expanded. Cities became larger. The potato had finally earned its place at Europe's table, but success carried a hidden danger. The more dependable the potato became, the more people trusted it. The more people trusted it, the more they depended on it. And nowhere would that dependence become greater or more dangerous than on an island across the Irish Sea. There, the potato wouldn't simply become another crop. It would become life itself. And when life depends on a single fragile thread, history has a habit of testing how strong that thread really is. By the beginning of the 19th century, nowhere on earth depended on the potato more than Ireland. To understand why, you have to understand how people lived. Most Irish families did not own the land they farmed. Large estates belonged to English and Anglo-Irish landlords, many of whom lived hundreds of miles away and rarely visited the people who worked their fields. Irish tenant farmers rented tiny plots of land, often just enough to build a small cottage and grow enough food to survive. Each generation inherited less land than the one before it. As families grew larger, farms became smaller. Good farmland was reserved for crops and livestock that generated income. The poorest families were pushed onto rocky hillsides and damp fields where little else would grow. For them, the potato was nothing short of a miracle. An acre of potatoes could feed an entire family for a year. It thrived in Ireland's cool, rainy climate. It grew in poor soils that defeated many other crops. It required little equipment. No expensive machinery, no horses, no mills, just a spade, seed potatoes, and hard work. Combined with buttermilk from a family cow, potatoes supplied an astonishing amount of nutrition. Carbohydrates for energy, vitamin C to prevent scurvy, potassium, fiber, and essential minerals, even enough protein to sustain healthy lives. It wasn't a luxurious diet, but it worked. And because it worked so well, Ireland's population exploded. From roughly 3 million people in the early 1700s, It climbed to more than 8 million by the 1840s. Entire generations had grown up knowing little else. The potato had done exactly what no one thought possible. It had transformed one of Europe's poorest societies into one capable of supporting millions. But beneath that success lay a silent weakness. Most Irish farmers planted the same variety. The Irish lumper. It produced reliable harvests. It tolerated difficult conditions, but genetically, it was almost identical from one field to the next. Imagine an entire nation relying on copies of the exact same key. If that key failed, every door would remain locked. Ireland had unknowingly placed its future in a single basket, and history was about to shake it. In the summer of 1845, something invisible arrived in Europe. It wasn't an invading army. It wasn't a political revolution. It was far smaller. A microscopic organism known today as Phytophthora infestans. Often called potato blight, it spreads through tiny spores carried by wind and moisture, cool temperatures, persistent rain, damp fields. Ireland offered the perfect conditions. At first, farmers noticed dark patches on potato leaves, nothing too alarming. Then the plants began collapsing. Healthy green fields turned black almost overnight. When desperate families dug into the soil, hoping to save their harvest, they discovered the tubers had already begun to rot beneath the ground. The smell was unforgettable. A sour, sickening odor drifted across entire villages. Everything people had depended upon, everything they had worked for, was dissolving into foul-smelling pulp. The first harvest failed, then the next, then another. Each year the blight returned. Each year hope faded. Families exhausted every possible option. They sold belongings, they borrowed money. They searched for wild plants. Some boiled grass, others gathered seaweed. Many simply waited, waiting for help, waiting for food, waiting for a harvest that never came. Starvation rarely comes alone. Hunger weakens the body. Disease finishes the work. Typhus spread rapidly through overcrowded communities. Dysentery contaminated drinking water. Cholera swept across exhausted populations already struggling to survive. Hospitals overflowed. Workhouses became overcrowded beyond imagination. Mass graves filled with those who had no strength left to fight. Parents watched children slowly waste away. Children watched parents disappear. Entire villages emptied. Some houses were abandoned forever. Others stood with doors still open, their occupants gone. By the time the famine finally eased in the early 1850s, around 1 million people had died. Another million had fled their homeland. For a country with a population of just over 8 million, the loss was almost impossible to comprehend. Few events in modern history transformed a nation so completely in such a short time. But the tragedy wasn't caused by disease alone. Even as Irish families starved, ships loaded with food continued leaving Irish ports. Grain, butter, livestock, food produced in Ireland was exported under military protection. The contradiction has haunted historians ever since. Why did food continue leaving a starving country? The answer lies in politics as much as agriculture. Relief efforts existed, but they were often slow, limited, and tied to harsh conditions. Many starving people were required to perform exhausting physical labor simply to earn enough money to buy food, whose prices had already become impossible to afford. Some officials believed providing too much assistance would encourage dependence. Others saw the famine as an unavoidable act of nature. Many Irish people saw something else: neglect. The debate continues to this day. What is beyond dispute is that political decisions shaped the scale of the catastrophe. Nature may have started the disaster. Human choices determined how devastating it became. The potato had not merely exposed a weakness in agriculture. It had exposed weaknesses in government, economics, and society itself. For those who survived, there was often only one option: leave. Families sold what little they owned to buy passage across the Atlantic. The ships became known by a haunting name: coffin ships. The nickname was painfully accurate: overcrowded, poorly ventilated. Disease spread rapidly during the weeks-long journey. Many passengers never reached their destination. Those who did arrived in places like Boston, New York, Philadelphia, Quebec, Liverpool, with little more than hope. Life wasn't immediately easier. Irish immigrants often encountered prejudice, poverty, and discrimination. Newspaper advertisements openly declared, "No Irish need apply." Catholics faced suspicion. Entire communities struggled to find work, yet they persevered. They built railroads, dug canals, worked factories, served in police forces, entered politics, founded businesses, raised families. Over time, Irish communities helped shape the cultural identity of countries across the English-speaking world. The famine had scattered a people across continents. Its consequences reached far beyond Ireland itself. Today, the potato grows in more than 100 countries. It is one of the world's most important food crops, feeding billions of people every year. Scientists continue developing new varieties resistant to pests, diseases, and changing climates. Gene banks preserve thousands of traditional potatoes, many descended from those ancient Andean varieties first cultivated thousands of years ago. That diversity is no accident. The Irish famine taught humanity a lesson that agriculture has never forgotten. Genetic diversity isn't a luxury, it's insurance. When every field contains identical plants, a single disease can become a national catastrophe. When diversity exists, survival becomes far more likely. The lesson extends far beyond farming. Nature is strongest when it is diverse. Civilizations are strongest when they learn from history rather than repeating it. And perhaps the greatest irony of all is this. When Spanish explorers crossed the Atlantic, they believed gold was the greatest treasure hidden in the Andes. Gold enriched kings. It financed wars. It decorated palaces. But gold cannot feed a hungry child. Gold cannot sustain an empire through winter. Gold cannot rescue a family from famine. The potato could. The conquistadors filled their ships with precious metals. Yet history remembers another cargo that quietly changed the world. A rough, muddy tuber carried across an ocean almost as an afterthought. It built civilizations, saved millions of lives, fueled population booms, triggered one of history's greatest tragedies, and continues to feed humanity every single day. Not bad, for something most of us leave buried beneath the soil. The next time you see a potato sitting unnoticed on a kitchen counter, remember, you're looking at one of the most influential everyday objects in human history. It built civilizations. It fed empires. It triggered one of history's greatest humanitarian disasters. And even today, it continues to feed billions of people around the world. Sometimes history isn't hidden inside a palace or buried beneath an ancient ruin. Sometimes, it's hiding in the everyday objects we overlook. If you enjoyed uncovering the hidden history behind one of the world's most ordinary foods, there are many more remarkable stories waiting to be told. Click the video on your screen to discover another everyday object that quietly changed human history. And if you enjoy thoughtful documentaries like this, consider subscribing to Exhibit A for more stories where ordinary objects reveal extraordinary histories. Until next time, keep looking closer.